Oh no, I think somebody up there was fucking with me from the beginning. Although my mother and father always called me Mike or Michael, but I only remember my schoolmates ever calling me Mick, because Mick has that flavour. Later on, of course, it was reinforced by the singer, and it gave with this, and this rock and roll stuff was milling around. So it was like a gimmick that wasn't. It wasn't, as I said to David Bowie when I first met him, I mean, Mick Rock is actually my name, Mr. Jones, you know. I mean, it was all about the time, and I mean, maybe a bit the way I looked a bit, and it was also where my heart was, which was with the musicians. There was some motherfucker at a record label trying to tell me. And I wasn't owned by anybody, and I did think they saw me a bit as like one of them, without the music, but some of the patter. The alchemical moment, that was an alchemical moment for me, but it was also an alchemical moment for the culture, especially when Lou and Iggy showed up. And he was like the ringmaster, because they didn't know what the fuck they were up to. David clearly did know something about what he was up to. And that summer of '72, the breakout summer, when all pandemonium began, it was a different time. It was talking hardcore, very young, sex, drugs and rock and roll, and there were priorities. And photography was not a priority. It was sex, drugs, rock and roll and music, you know, in whatever order you choose. And creativity, that's the key thing as well. It wasn't just, whoa, what kind of, well, what about the sex, Mick? You go, oh, well, you had to have been there. I could be lying about anything I tell you, because you never know unless you're in the room.
Didn't know what time it was.
Living theatre, Space, Odyssey, Kabuki theatre. He was drawing. Once you got to realise what he was up to, he every time he twitched, he drew some new element. And it was a very rich concoction that he was up to. Musically as well, he was you couldn't, well, that's the, you know the sound of the Rolling Stones. It's the same, it's always, is that Keith Richard guitar and Mick Jagger doing his thing. God bless him. David was always more than just a rock and roller, though. And he even said in interviews, which for him it was, he always regarded himself as an artist. He certainly was pop in the sensibility of his audience for a while, because he had that element too. He could give you whatever. Which way do you want it? That's sound and vision. He was combining those two words, sound and vision. He was definitely a visionary. I mean, you could call him anything you want, but you'd have to include the word visionary. I mean, you can try and avoid it and you can't. David would always have his eye on the culture a bit, whereas Iggy and Lou didn't give a fuck, you know. But David, because he could act, and he has acted, and he was very astute with the media. It's hard to realise how totally brilliant he was, really, because you have to keep talking about so many fucking things. And then there is the music, which I know in his core of core, that's what he cares about most. I knew David wasn't beamed in from Mars, but when I'm shooting him, he was. I mean, I've always been capable of that suspension of my disbelief. I've got some pretty, you could say, pretty realistic, neo-journalistic shots in the book, but I was just shooting. I wasn't thinking about that particularly. They were the less important pictures to me. The important ones were the ones like the one in the mirror. And David, Lou and Iggy, of course. Because he kept changing his clothes, he was bound to get a bit of attention. But the other thing was the way he looked. I mean, the way he dressed, his organic style. Just in the nature of his body language, his attitude. And he wasn't frightened of looking fab. You know, some people might want to play it down. Bob Dylan might want to. And it's nothing to do with talent. It was just a whole other way of approaching it. And he was always had something new on, and he looked so fabulous. You know? I mean, this hasn't been anybody. I don't care. who has had such heavy influence, especially on modern designers, just by not only wearing all these fucking clothes, but looking so fabulous in them. You know, that was, you want to look at them anyway. And then, so then they'd start nicking bits and pieces, like that jacket in that famous shot. I know people have had a go at, well, it's a loose world, the world of fashion. I always called him tactile intuitive. I mean, he was totally intuitive, as well as being very deliberate. He was more complex. He was a complex manifestation. One thing I comment on in the book is his, skinny though he wasn't just skinny. He was very spare frame, but look at his legs, the fucking thighs. And the neck was the long neck. It wasn't like Bob Dylan's, it was, you know, it was quite swan-like. He was also an enthusiast and a fan, and he had a light spirit. I think the spiritual lightness was important. And he showed me things, not by telling me, but just by being and by giving me certain opportunities. Because he was the most self-aware rock and roll photo subject. Because, of course, Dylan, Beatles, Stones, there was image going on, but it wasn't, David was so much more sophisticated. It made him a star. It did. He wasn't a star before it, and then he was a star by the end of it. You might even in modern parlance call him a superstar. Certainly the media, for what it was paying him a lot of attention, and so were the photographers. He certainly didn't need me after that. It's a blind motherfucker, I'll tell you that, this book. Well, that means you don't have to look to feel its power. I know David will say nothing about it, but he will love it. But David approved the book and he signed everything, so he must love it. But he hasn't seen the finished beast. I'm sure when he gets that. And he will not say one single word